Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part two of applying I-CBT for treating OCD. So I just wanted to start out giving you a brief overview of what we went over so far in part one. And so we've learned how OCD is constructed through the first four modules. So the first module is talking about how OCD always follows a sequence. They'll have a trigger, and then that's just everyday life. It could even just be leaving your house. And then the obsessional doubt could come in and ask, did I forget to turn off my oven? What if I forgot? The consequence of the doubt is just that story that the big bad thing that they're afraid is going to happen. And that's the story that they can really get absorbed in. So the consequence is I burn my house down, I lose everything that matters to us. And of course, when there's that absorption in that fear, the feared consequence, there's going to be a lot of anxiety and discomfort. They feel it, it feels very real somatically. And because it feels so real, they'll do everything that they can to prevent that bad thing from happening, which includes compulsions and compulsive avoidance. So sometimes they may even not just check the oven over and over again, but they may even avoid leaving the house just in case they miss something. So that was module one. Module two says there's a very specific reasoning and logic that OCD uses to strengthen their belief in this doubt. So the doubt starts to feel more valid when there's over reliance on possibility. They also distrust their senses and their sense data and actual here and now evidence. And these last five pieces are the irrelevant associations that OCD may pull in. So OCD may pull in various facts like ovens do malfunction, houses do burn down. Again, all of these are irrelevant associations. So even though that's true, it actually doesn't make it relevant to the here and now. There's rules about protecting our home and our loved ones. It may also pull in hearsay. I heard a story about somebody burning down their house. I remember someone sharing about falling asleep and the cigarette fell out of their hand and it burned down their house. So if that can happen to them, this can happen to us as well. They may pull in personal experiences from the past. One time I left the stove on, so if I can do that, maybe this time I forgot to turn off the oven as well. And then anything is possible. So we have the sequence, we have the logic and reasoning that strengthens that doubt. That's typical in obsessional reasoning. That's different from our non-OCD reasoning, right? Because in non-OCD reasoning, you will trust your here and now evidence. You trust your senses. So if you had a question on what if I forgot to brush my teeth? Because it's not within their OCD theme, they'll say, oh, I can taste the mint. My toothbrush is wet. I'm moving on. I trusted my senses. I don't pull in that, oh, sometimes people have forgotten to brush their teeth because that's actually not relevant right now. I have forgotten too in the past, but right now I can trust the data that's coming up for me. And they don't say, oh, I heard a story about people forgetting to brush their teeth. Poor hygiene can lead to abscesses and then can cause heart health issues. So we don't really pull in any of that when it's a non-OCD situation. And then we don't pull in possibility either. Yeah, it's possible, but right now, if I have evidence in the here and now that tells me I brush my teeth, I just move on, right? I don't get absorbed in it. And then we talked about the OCD story and how story is very powerful. In OCD, the story is often very vivid. It's full of details. It's in the first person, and there's a beginning and middle and end. So not only are they wondering, what if I forgot to turn off the oven? They see their house burnt down, they see loved ones being harmed, losing everything that matters to them. They and their loved ones are the center of attention, and then there's a lot of details in that process. So the absorption in that story makes it very compelling and scary. It's not just a single sentence or a doubt, it's usually quite vivid. And then we talked about the feared possible self, that this is the core that seems to be driving all of the obsessional doubts that come up. Because someone who's afraid, oh, maybe I forgot to turn off the oven or lock the door or maybe I missed something, I said something to hurt someone's feelings. Maybe I was insensitive in some way and caused harm in some way. They may have a feared possible self that pulls all of that together, that they're afraid that there's someone who is harmful, or they're afraid that there's someone who is negligent or just careless. And so this feared possible self seems to drive all of the obsessional doubts that they have, and it is the opposite of the real self. And so that's just a quick overview of the first four modules. And now in the process, after module 4, they then teach module 11. So the sequence seems to make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to just follow the order that our trainers have rearranged to just make this process flow a bit better. And so it does make a lot of sense after you identify their feared possible self. You then go to module 11 to have them actually understand their real self. Okay. And once I go through these modules, I'll make some space for questions. So they have a feared possible self, and the real self is really one of my favorite modules because I think the core of I-CBT work is actually teaching people to learn to trust themselves. And because they see OCD as a trust disorder, the biggest piece that a person with OCD doesn't trust is their real self, because they have that feared possible self that they've continued to be afraid of. And so OCD tells them they could be this feared possible self, a bad person, an immoral person, a negligent, careless person, someone who's just oblivious and insensitive, who says things that hurts people. So they're really afraid that they would be this person. These doubts come up around that feared possible self, and then the compulsions are there to do everything that they can to prevent themselves from becoming this really scary person. In Module 11, when we teach the real self, we teach them that the feared possible self is actually a non-self. It's OCD's biggest lie. For whatever reason, they've developed this fear of becoming this type of person. And sometimes I see trauma play a part in this, sometimes not. But it could be I actually had a parent figure who was quite selfish or oblivious and created harm. Or they just knew somebody that they cared about who did go crazy and lose their mind. And so I had another client whose uncle they were really close to and cared about developed dementia. And then they came over to their house and everything was taken apart. And it was just really scary to see the house so disheveled. And from that moment, she didn't realize, but she was really afraid that she'd lose her mind and then really become unavailable to the people that she cared about. Because he ultimately got to a space where he couldn't even remember her and they were really close. And so we don't really know the reason why they developed a feared possible self, but trauma may play a part. Maybe some sensitivities to some exposure to something led them to be really afraid of becoming this. And what this module does is allows them to really see who they really are based on reality, because a feared possible self is just another obsessional doubt. It's just another what if, like what if I forgot to turn off the oven? But it's a what if that's applied to who they are as a person. And so you can apply the whole process to really understanding, okay, there's a obsessional reasoning that plays a part in me believing this, feared possible self. And there's a story that I'm absorbed in that I could become this person as well. And so then I could use my sense data to actually trust who I really am as a person. So in this module, I just walk the client through really learning who they are. So there's one story in the imagination. You could be this awful person, this feared possible self. And then let's also now pull in reality, pull in who you actually are. And so we just walk through this process, and it's often really enlightening for the client to then look at what are some of the actions you did today? What does that show about you as a person, your qualities, your attributes? And so they'll have actions like, I dropped my children off. My child was sad, so I really tried to make space to talk to her. And then I replied to some emails the attributes were it's important for me that people aren't left hanging. And then I did some work because it's important to me to just be a functional part of society, contribute to the world. And then I may have made some mistakes too, right? Like I raised my voice at my husband. So that also shows I'm human. And then I came back and repaired, like, hey, I was having a long day and that wasn't fair for me to blow up on you. And so it's not trying to paint a picture of perfection, but it's really trying to show who they really are in reality based on what you could see, hear, based on their perceptions, based on their intentions, who they really are. And then it's accepting their true feelings and desires. And so for someone who's afraid, like, I could harm someone, I could do something that's just really careless and insensitive. Their true desires when they're with somebody is to connect or maybe to teach or to guide. So it's also a part of this is trusting that inner sense data, their desires, their true intentions, why they're there doing the certain thing. Um, so they're there with their children because they want to guide and be a positive influence for their family. And so we connect with real intentions and desires. This is just a process of really slowing down to learn who they really are outside of that feared self. And then just really thinking of many other aspects of who they are. Think of what would you need to have done to become your feared self as well. So what would you need to have done today to become a person who's actually bad or immoral, right? Or someone who's negligent or careless. And so they're looking at, well, in order to become that, I would have just like be like, oh, my kid's just crying, like screw her, I don't care. I forget to drop them off at school because I thought today was a Saturday instead of a weekday. So it's just someone who's oblivious or insensitive or careless. And then we ask this big question at the end of what are the chances of you really being this feared possible self? And I actually like to save that question for the very end, but I just have them think about that as we then look at many other aspects to help them shape who they are. So at home, at work, at school, and social situations, what are things that people would thank you for, congratulate you for? What positive qualities does this say about you? And you're just, again, really bringing flesh to who they really are. Because so often they're so absorbed in becoming that feared self, they've lost being able to be present to really look at who they really are. For example, like I can think of a client who's the sweetest, purest human being who's afraid that she's going to drown her child in the pool. And she's so absorbed in that that she's doing everything that she can, making sure people are around, making sure her partner's there to observe her when she's interacting with her child. Just making sure she really checks and rechecks to make sure she doesn't lose control and drowns her child. And then she forgets to see, like, oh, every day I'm actually there for people. I take care of people. I help people. People say that I'm really responsible. They trust me. They trust how kind I am. My life goals, my values are to make a difference in the world in the way that I can. The principles that I live by are kindness, love, giving compassion, guiding my children. And what does that say about you? What are your strong points? And for her, this was just so enlightening, where she's like, this is who I am. And then what are the chances that you'd become that feared possible self? Like suddenly seeing and looking at who you are objectively. And sometimes I even pull in a bit of the double standard. If you could see this as a dear friend who's exactly like you in every way, just outside of you. And what are the chances that she'd suddenly just turn? She'd just turn evil, she'd turn bad, she'll just drown her child. Right? And she said the chances are zero, unless there's something like traumatic brain injury, something just horrible happens that changes their character. And even then, it's just she just doesn't see her dear friend being able to be like that, and that dear friend is actually her. Okay. So I just love this module and just really grounding themselves in this person that's always been there. And this is not to convince them that they're not their feared possible self. This is just allowing them to see their real self, to see reality and to connect with reality instead of just being absorbed in that fear. And then you could look through that through for the process, and then you could um, send them this practice card of just allowing them to really see, to slow down, to track who they really are on an everyday basis. Okay. So that's the beginnings of deconstructing OCD. They're also trusting perceptions more if they look at their real self. They're also trusting more of their common sense. People don't just suddenly turn, change their character, suddenly go to really caring, attentive to suddenly being really evil or bad or insensitive. And they're trusting their inner sense data. If you all remember, that's their true desires, their true intentions. When my client's there with her child, she's not there to harm. Her true desires or intentions are to play, to engage, to make sure my child feels loved and cared about. And then that helps them to form their real self. And then that feared possible self becomes less and less powerful as a driver that drives them to have all of these doubts about what they could possibly do and the compulsions to prevent it from happening. Because through the I-CBT research, they're looking at what are the chances that the feared possible selves come true and obsessional doubts come true for people. It was 0%. 0%, because none of those doubts were based on any here and now evidence. So let's talk about doubt. This is now module 5. So again, 1 through 4 is how OCD is constructed, and 5 through 11 is how we deconstruct OCD. So then we just walk them through the real self. And then now this is really letting them see that OCD, obsessional doubts, are 100% imaginary. They come from this vivid brain. And it's powerful because there's that story that they're absorbed in, but it's completely imaginary. So we want to first teach them the difference between reasonable doubt and obsessional doubts. So reasonable doubts have here and now direct evidence. Obsessional doubts do not. And I really like the story that they use or the example that they use for the doubt. What if my house is on fire? What if there's a fire? First, what would make that a reasonable doubt? Yeah, I'm having a question if there's a slide you're supposed to be seeing. I've been sharing the slides the whole time. Is everyone else able to see the slides? Okay. Yeah, so people are able to see the slides. So maybe see if there's some settings or a window you can click over to see them. And then a reasonable doubt versus obsessional doubts. So reasonable doubts, again, usually you have some sense data first. It's not like a fear and then I'm trying to look for evidence. And so, what if my house is on fire? What if there's a fire when you walk into the house? What would make that reasonable if you trusted your sense data, which again is perceptions, your 5 senses, your common sense, your inner sense data, and your true self? Yeah, I'm smelling smoke. I walked in, I smelled some smoke. Then a reasonable doubt is very reasonable, right? Let me go look. I'm hearing the alarm. I smell smoke. I may see something is off, right? Yep. I may see a fire. I smell something different. My sensations, I feel something hotter in the room, in the space. And so then I really want to respond. Yeah. And so you see evidence first, you have the doubt. And then once you put out the fire, call Call 911, put out the fire, depending on how big it is. Maybe you can put it out yourself. Oh, yeah, Carly, great one. Feels more difficult to breathe. Then reasonable doubts get resolved, right? Because then there's no more fire. What if there's a fire in my house? Yes, there was. I trust it. We dealt with it. It gets resolved. Obsessional doubts do not get resolved. So if someone didn't trust their perceptions, and let's say they're really looking at over relying on possibility, they're dismissing here and now evidence, so they don't trust their sense data. What would make this obsessional? They may be even pulling in irrelevant associations, right? I heard a story about a house was burnt down. Maybes, what ifs. What would be obsessional what ifs and maybes? And so again, think of someone who's not trusting their inner sense data, their perceptions, their common sense. Yeah. So they don't smell smoke, but they say, what if something's off and I just can't smell right now? Uh-huh. Yeah. Maybe I did leave the curling iron on. And maybe there's some truth in that. And then they check. If it's reasonable, it's resolved. If it's not reasonable, they said, what if I thought I unplugged it, but I didn't? So let me go in and check one more time. So remember, there was certainty before the doubt came in. There was certainty, they know they unplugged it, they know they turned it off, they saw the light turn off. But then they may say, what if it malfunctioned? What if I need to come back and check one more time? What if I thought I unplugged it, but I didn't? Yeah, so I'm again doubting my perceptions. I had certainty, but now doubts are coming in. So I just feel very absorbed in this feared consequence of burning down my house. So let me go back just to check one more time. Yeah, there was one time I forgot to turn something off. It didn't burn down the house, but they may think of a time from a personal experience when they forgot to do that, a human moment. So they may even use these past human moments to justify going back in to check. I've had clients say, what if it's an electrical outlet in the wall? And so I'm not able to see it, but it's in there. And so it's malfunctioning. What if I turned off the curling iron, but it just suddenly turned back on? So what are they doubting there? What are they not trusting when they say, oh, I know I turned it off, but what if it suddenly just malfunctioned and it just came back on? They're not trusting themselves as a responsible person with pretty good senses, usually. Many of my clients with OCD are highly intelligent, responsible, really make good decisions, but they're doubting that they're that kind of person. And in that, they're also not trusting their common sense, right? What I know to be true according to common knowledge and personal experience is that things that turn off don't usually suddenly just come back on, but they're afraid of that. And so they're also not trusting their perceptions that I'm not sensing anything, I'm not smelling anything, but I'm just so absorbed in this scary story. Yeah, and so I just walk them through that story for them to really decipher, oh, when is it that I have a reasonable doubt and when is it that I have an obsessional doubt? Because in OCD, not only are there obsessional doubts that they get absorbed in, they also get to a space where they don't trust their reasonable doubts. So I had a client who said, I did have a bump that was starting to come up on my arm, and I did have evidence of that, but then I think, oh, that's just my mind. I'm always worried about certain things, so I don't really need a checkup on that. And so the reasonable doubt is, oh, I'm actually seeing something, I'm sensing something. But because I continue to hear, like, you're just someone who's always scared and doubtful, don't trust yourself, don't trust your fears. Sometimes they even doubt their reasonable doubts as well. And so not only do we want them to see obsessional doubts are in the imagination, we want them to also begin to trust reasonable doubts and trust themselves as a person when they do see here and now evidence and something to address that's important. Yeah, Michelle's saying they're just not trusting how things work. They're not trusting common sense. I've shared with you a medical professional who's brilliant, right? Has gone through a lot of schooling to be where he's at, and he sees a band-aid at the park and wonders, what if there's HIV in it? And then it just jumps at me. Or someone who just knows how different things work, but they see like, oh, there was a leak. And then they just see like mold spores flying around everywhere, invading the system. And so that's part of the absorption in their story, but they're not trusting their common sense. They know HIV doesn't just jump from a band-aid into their system. And that one leak doesn't then just lead most mold spores to be like all over everywhere and then just be really intrusive into your system. Okay, and then in this module, we just continue to walk through teaching them how to identify when is it obsessional and when is it reasonable. And then once you click on obsessional, this slide will come up. And I'll just walk through one with you. I like this one. Is this obsessional or reasonable? And just walk through it with them so they can just really begin to practice being aware. And so I'll walk you through this as if I'm walking through it with a client. So Seth backs out of his driveway. He hears a crunching noise and feels the car go over something. He knows that in the past, his kids have forgotten toys in the driveway, and they were playing outside that morning as well. Seth wonders if he ran over something with his car. Is this a reasonable doubt or an obsessional doubt? I'm seeing reasonable. Okay, what makes it reasonable? Yeah, he's using his typical reasoning processes, right? Trusting here and now evidence, trusting senses, heard the crunching noise, the car went over something. It's reasonable if the kids were playing with toys outside that um, they would leave it there and he could have ran it over, right? That's trusting common sense as well. What would make this obsessional? Yeah, he didn't hear a noise. He's just backing out and he's like, what if I ran over something? And usually for my clients, it's not just a toy, because that's not really a feared consequence. It's like, what if I ran over my neighbor's kid and I just didn't even notice? What if I ran over my own kid? No evidence, more absorption in the imagination. And then what are they not trusting if they wondered, oh, what if I ran over my neighbor's kid? Not trusting what specific sense data. Yeah, because their real self is one form of sense data. They're not trusting their perceptions. They didn't hear anything, see anything. And also the feeling of going over their driveway is a very different feeling than the feeling of going over a child, right? And I've had a client who has gone back to a speed bump 7 times to just make sure she did not run over a kid. And so the absorption in that story can feel so powerful and so scary that it drives not just their emotions and fears and absorption in the story, but the compulsion to do everything that they can to come back just to make sure. And then you can imagine just how torturous that is. In I-CBT, they don't really see we do compulsions because it brings relief. We hear that a lot, right? Like in ERP, oh, they do compulsions, they check, there's some relief. And I think there's some truth in that. Like, okay, there's not a kid there once I came back to that speed bump. And we see that it's actually quite torturous to continue to do compulsions. Imagine going 7 times back to that same speed bump. Why people come back to do compulsions is usually because they're terrified to leave the OCD bubble. It's so scary to not check. Not so much that it brings relief every time. And maybe there is some, but then it's this like being lost and dissociated and tortured to come back over and over again. And I have plenty of clients who have said, I actually feel no relief when I'm stuck in doing compulsions. I come back and I check, and pretty quickly I say, oh, but what if I missed something? And what if I thought it was a speed bump, but what if the kid's under my car? And so she'll come out and get out and check to see if the kid was stuck there too. Right? So yeah, there's just a lot of compassion for that process and also understanding that absorption and doing the compulsions is often very torturous. I've had clients most recently said, I then just started crying because I'm so exhausted. I don't want to do this anymore and I can't stop. I just feel like I can't do that. And then there's several other ones that you can look at there and to just go over that with them. So this is Bob. He's going to bed. He goes to his front door he locked up for the night. He turns the deadbolt and locks the doorknob. He hears the deadbolt slide home. He can see that both locks are in place. He walks away, and then you can imagine all the things that can come up if you have that vivid brain. And he thinks, maybe I didn't lock the door. Maybe the lock broke when I turned it. Maybe I accidentally unlocked it when I pulled my hand away. Maybe it unlocked itself. Maybe there's a way that someone can come in and just loosen it as well. Is this reasonable or obsessional? Yeah, it's obsessional. And why? Mhm. Yeah, they're stuck in what ifs. And also remember, reasonable doubts can be what ifs as well. And they're actually using logic, but it's that obsessional logic, right? It may pull in over reliance on possibility while distrusting senses. And those are the key pieces. And obsessional doubts, again, don't get resolved. If it was a reasonable doubt, it will get resolved and they move on. Because obsessional doubts doubt their sense data, it just doesn't matter how much they come back and check. There's always going to be what ifs and maybes. That doubts their sense data, overly relies on possibility.
No, I think we made a connect there down over there too.
Okay, that doesn't sound like there's a
So
problem.
yeah, we're up on our visit.
Oops, someone's taking care of business. Yeah. And remember, there's actually a reasoning and logic in this process. They are doubting their common sense, right? Like they're doubting their common sense that locks don't just break when you turn it. They don't then just unlock. You're not a type of person who locks and then unlocks and then forgets. But there is a reasoning and a logic to the OCD where facts are people have had their homes broken in, and the rules are I should protect my family at all cost. I've had a personal experience where I've forgotten to lock the door before. We've all had that. But if I've forgotten, because I knew I was distracted, I come back and I check and then it's done because then I can trust myself after that. Then I have certainty, I move on, right? Because I'm trusting my sense data. For them, they may continue to get absorbed in hearsay. I heard a story of a break-in. I just read about that on Facebook. And so let me come back to check just one more time. So it's just there is reasoning and logic. It's just a different, a lot of the irrelevant associations kind of reasoning and processes. Not trusting their common sense, not trusting their perceptions and who they are as a person. Who's usually not just aloof, who would be like, oh, let me lock it, oh, let me unlock it, and then I forgot. They're not that type of person, but they believe that they could be. It's that feared possible self, right? So you could really see absorption and the imagination and possibilities. And so this will often just begin to allow them to have, again, that bird's eye view of their OCD and how it's functioning, and to begin to use their typical reasoning that they use all the time. When it's not a feared possible self, They all the time trust their common sense. They trust that when I brush my teeth, and the toothbrush is wet, I can just really trust that and then move forward with my life. Okay. And then this also shares a little bit about inferential confusion. You imagine something's possible, you feel like you have to do something about it in reality. I imagine maybe my dog's hurt, maybe he ate some needles, and then I feel like I have to do something in reality, like hold him really cautiously, check, make sure, like I'm not pushing on his abdomen in some way that it could create more harm. And this is inferential confusion because the here and now sense data tells her like the dog is just sleeping there in the corner, feeling just fine, looks really safe. And so it's just sharing a little bit about just that terminology. Inferential confusion is just when you have an imagined possibility and you feel like you have to do something about it in reality. And it discounts our perceptions. It gives a lot more weight to imagination. We all have inferential confusion. We've all been there. We hear a story, something bad could happen, so let me do something about it. Just like when we talked about I put my foot outside of the bed, I feel like the monster can grab me. I know that's not true. And because I get absorbed in that story, I feel scared. I got to move my leg back in, or I have to cover it with the covers. So that's inferential confusion. In OCD, inferential confusion is just a lot higher. So when you give them the inferential confusion questionnaire, 93 or higher is indicative of OCD. And we only see people with OCD having a score of 93 or higher when they really get absorbed in the imagination and do a lot more in reality. And then you just review the process with them. So this is again the following week. Typically every week I do one module. If I'm pausing for some IFS, that's usually one whole session. If I really see there's a trauma tied to their feared possible self, I may do some work around that to heal that feared possible self or to work through some pieces of that trauma. And then this is module 6 that talks about not only is OCD 100% imaginary, obsessional doubts are 100% irrelevant because people may still say, but it's possible. So just to be safe, I need to do everything that I can because it's possible. And in this module, it's saying a possibility really doesn't matter. Everything is possible, and it doesn't make it relevant when there's no here and now sense data telling you that it's relevant. So clients may say, but this doubt could still come true. Anything is possible. Even if there's a small chance, I can't risk it. And so possibility, likelihood gets really strong in OCD. Doesn't matter if it's a 1% chance, if it's possible, and I could be negligent and I miss something, I'm going to do everything that I can to prevent it from happening. And so this module is all about sharing with them about how possibility just doesn't matter. It doesn't make it relevant. And so this is just one example that they use that there is a possibility here. A meteor is going to hit me on the head. And the compulsion is I keep watching for the sky. I may wear a hard hat. I want to make sure my family stays away from the windows. It could happen, right? And I don't see any here and now evidence. So they just walk through this. Many people don't relate to this. And so it's a good teaching one because it can show them how OCD can just really latch onto possibilities and lead them to do some really unnecessary compulsions. And so I just talked to them about this and what would they think about someone who's afraid of the meteor hitting their head, hitting their family, hitting their home? And why should they um, let go of checking the sky constantly and making sure their family stays away from windows, etc.? And so they just talk you through this and they say, well, because anything's possible. And I don't need to do those compulsions that, this person doesn't need to do that. That's just really taking up their time. And then you could see that they start to apply this to their own theme as well. Really takes up their time. It doesn't feel like they need that. And then without direct evidence, possibility is just possibility. And I may walk them through various things our trainers have used. Like just look at me right now. I may have a fear that there's um, termites under my house. Our house is older. Ultimately, they're going to eat a hole through, and I'm just going to fall through, and you're not going to see me anymore. And then I just talk them through that. Is that reasonable? Is that obsessional? There's a possibility, but what about this possibility makes it irrelevant right now? And they can just talk me through that, and they almost become my therapist as I take on the obsessional reasoning. And my clients would say, well, unless you're feeling something, like your floor is just more unstable as you're walking on it, you're sensing that there's really no reason to stop our session to check your floor to make sure you're not going to fall through, and that I won't see you anymore. And right now, if you trusted your common sense, usually it just doesn't happen that quickly. A hole just then opens up and then you fall to hell. And so it's kind of an interesting process when we can take on the obsessional reasoning and doubts, and then they can walk us through why is possibility not relevant? Why do I not need to deal with this right now? And then we ask them about the meteor story. What would need to happen to make it relevant, to make it a reasonable doubt for you to do something about it? So, for it to be relevant, then it's worth me putting in some energy to think about it and to respond to it and do something about it in reality. Otherwise, it's just an absorption in the imagination. So, yeah, what would you need in order for this to be relevant? For the meteor is about to hit us. What would you need for it to become reasonable and relevant for you to do something about it and to think about it, to problem solve around it, to invest energy in it? Great, Phyllis. You hear something from the news. Yeah, the news, NASA, you're getting a warning. Oh, this area of the country's we're seeing the trajectory of this meteor that could hit them. So let's clear out. Yeah, there's here and now evidence. Yep, a recent event, professionals are predicting it. Then that's something to respond to. There's some orders to evacuate. Excellent. And so we just have them walk through that. What would you need in order to make this doubt relevant? And so they can walk through all of this. I hear sirens. I hear neighbors talking about evacuating. That sounds important. I actually see it, like NASA is showing different things about the meteor approaching. There's weather alerts, there are evacuation alerts. And then we have them now, this is going off theme, and then I'll have them apply it to their own. So I would ask them within the past week, has there been an obsessional doubt that's come up that's led you to do compulsions and really get absorbed in a feared consequence? And then we have them identify, was it reasonable or obsessional? And sometimes they can see that it's obsessional. Most of the time they can, sometimes they don't. And then we walk them through the process. What would you need in order to make this reasonable? So first, I want them to first see that this wasn't a reasonable doubt because it's doubting sense data. It's overly relying on possibility. It's pulling in irrelevant associations with obsessional reasoning and logic. And once they can see it's an obsessional doubt, they may still get hung up on, but it's still possible. It's still possible that my kid could eat something that leads them to contract something that could really harm their development and health. That is possible. And what would you need to make that relevant? So then they would walk through, well, I would need to actually see, oh, my child's beginning to act differently. I would then trust myself as a mom who's actually quite in tune with my children's behaviors. And when they have a change, I would know. I could sense when they're lethargic. I could sense when there's just a shift in them. And so these are all the things they would need to see and hear. Maybe they could feel a fever, see different things, see that their kid is acting differently. They would trust their common sense that their children then don't just go from really healthy to suddenly being developmentally delayed for some reason. Trust their inner sense data. I'm here to protect, to guide, love my children. And so these are the things I would need to see to make that possibility relevant. Without these things, it's all irrelevant. It's just a possibility, it's just in the imagination. And then I can move on with my life. So, in this process, I really like to walk them through the here and now exposure that I sent with you. Or, I'm sorry, that I sent to you in your email. And so let me share that tool with you. Many of you are already familiar with the hidden emotion. So I'll share this with you, and then I'll bring together a demo as well for the module 7 about leaving the OCD bubble. The OCD bubble is just when they're absorbed in doing compulsions and being absorbed in obsessional doubts. Okay. So this tool really aligns with Rich Gallagher's mastery approach. If you haven't watched that webinar, I just highly recommend it. And this just talks about really allowing them to have a tool and a process to just engage with life and reality. And because I-CBT is a gradual process of turning on the lights in that haunted house to really see the mechanisms, it can be a little bit slower in bringing relief. And so early on, I actually like to bring in this tool. It's inspired by ACT, but it came from this Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts book by Sally Winston and Martin Seif. And they were not writing about ACT. I just turned this into like ACT in a nutshell. Okay. Because I just see this begins to just give clients a tangible process to bring some relief when they're really absorbed. And so imagine my client who's afraid of drowning her child. So the first step I just have them engage in is to just recognize and label. You're no longer absorbed in that content and trying to figure it out, but let's just step out and notice, oh, this is an obsessional doubt. I'm just recognizing it for what it is. I've now learned what obsessional doubts are and I can label it. This is an obsessional doubt. I'm having an obsessional doubt about drowning my baby. So the first step is just disengaging from really getting absorbed in the content and trying to figure it out. Have that that bird's eye view to just observe the process. And then you recognize and label it. You're just a bit more removed from that process. And then you accept and allow. It's not fighting, suppressing, trying to resolve it, trying to seek reassurance for it. It's just accepting, okay, I have OCD. And this thought is going to come and go. I will have moments when I have obsessional doubts. So I accept it. I allow it to be there. I'm not fighting it. I'm not feeling so terrified or threatened about it. I mean, you can feel whatever you want, but you're not reacting as if it's the greatest threat. And we see that when we just flow with it and have an acceptance attitude and know that this is just what's going to come, and I allow it to be, it flows through faster. When I fight it, suppress it, like, why am I having this? I'm a disgusting person. This could be true. It actually stays sticky. It stays stuck way longer for them. And so you recognize and label, you accept and allow it to be there. And I like to pull in some positive reframing from TEAM-CBT as well. I know these thoughts are here because I'm really scared to harm children. And that's because that's my feared possible self. Why I have this fear is because children really matter to me. And this will always be a vulnerable spot. Children will matter. My kids will always matter to me. And so my worst fear is something bad happening to them, especially by my hands, right? And so it makes sense that I will have this fear that comes up from time to time because I care about children. I care about their well-being. I want to protect them. So I'm just doing some values work and tying that in. That seems to help them accept and allow the process better. And then feel, how often in OCD we try to escape feeling that anxiety and discomfort in that sequence that we talked about. Because I'm absorbed in that feared consequence, I feel suffocated. I feel tightness in my chest. I feel sick to my stomach. I feel so disturbed. And I want to do everything that I can to get away from it. And why I call this here and now exposure is it's really like interoceptive exposure where you just let yourself feel and allow it to be there. And in this process, it can feel really scary and also really empowering for them. So for my clients who's feeling that really disgusted, uncomfortable, terrified, panicky sensation, I just have them notice it and be there with it. Allow yourself to feel. And feelings are feelings, and they will come and they will go. And in ACT, they also just allow you to bring that feeling to life. Where is that feeling? What is the texture? What is the color? So I'm feeling sick in my stomach. It feels, tight. It feels hard. It feels like it's prickly. What color is it? What texture is it? Can you draw an outline around it just in your imagination? And then expand that outline. Just make space for it. It makes sense that you would feel this way when you're absorbed in a really scary story, right? And feelings will come and they will go. And you notice it and you continue to move through life, allowing the feelings to be. And then you have them really slow down. For many clients, when they're in OCD, it's just very busy. I gotta check, it's a lot of activated energy. And so slowing down means literally slow down and just train the scared part of you that there's no threat or danger right now in reality, right? So literally slow your movements, literally slow your breathing, and just teach your body there is no danger in reality, even though it's in the imagination. And as we know, stories in the imagination are so powerful. Many times we're absorbed in a story, we watch a scary movie, and we can feel all of those feelings. And that doesn't mean there's danger in real life. And I learned this piece from Marina Dick. She is one of our TEAM-CBT trainers. She talks about in the anxious brain, two things that are medicinal for them is connecting with care and appreciation. And so in the slowdown, I just have them, instead of being absorbed inside, take your perceptions outside. Be absorbed in what is it that you see, hear, feel, and sense that you appreciate or care about. Again, it's appreciation or care. And so for one of my clients who was really absorbed in I could harm my students, etc., in this moment, he just then looked outside. He was like, I'm almost never this present when I'm absorbed in a fear. And he said, I could really appreciate the plants that my wife has put up right now. She loves plants. She takes really good care of them. And it makes our room really beautiful. And I can really appreciate that. And it was moving for him to just sit there and connect with the colors of the plants, its function. It's giving us cleaner air. It's purifying the space for us. And it's also just beautiful. Helps us to connect with nature. It was spiritual for him. He believes like plants, flowers, living beings are just a gift. And it was a very spiritual experience. So slowing down can do that for them. And then proceed with life. And I added in this piece from Rich because he's saying, let them proceed with whatever they're ready for. It doesn't have to be any big thing, but ask them if you didn't have OCD or absorption in the obsessional doubt right now, what would you be doing in this moment instead of compulsions? How would you engage with life? What aligns with your values? And then Rich would add in whatever they're ready for. One small step can take them really far. And so, whatever it is that they're ready for, have them engage in it. So, in that moment, instead of checking and rechecking, ruminating, he said, you know what I can do right now is just take a step outside and have some fresh air instead of being absorbed in my office right now, ruminating. And then living today according to my values would be I'm going to have dinner with my family. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to support my wife in doing homework with our children and guide them. That's really what I want to do. And he may or may not be able to do everything on that list, but if he could do one thing that's proceeding with life instead of OCD guiding you, your values are guiding you, your core self is guiding you. And so this is a tool. Sometimes I've taught it from module one because they're just desperate to have something to bring them relief. Sometimes I've just emailed this to clients. I had a client, I just finished module two with her. I emailed this to her and then she applied it and she said, this tool has been so helpful for me as I'm gaining insight from I-CBT. This is starting to allow me to get some relief and movement and just feeling better about life as she's doing more. So, um, now we are into the last module that I'm going to review with you, which is the OCD bubble. But let me make some space now to answer any questions, what this has been like for you, just learning about reasonable and obsessional doubts, and having this additional tool, the here and now exposure. Okay, I'm seeing a couple of questions. So I'm looking over here because I have another screen. Okay, ignore this if you've already addressed it. Wondering what you or the team tell your clients or people with OCD to be able to recognize what is OCD thoughts that may or may not be harmful to loved ones and what's not. Okay. In my work, I find that this is often a point of friction. Those with OCD aren't always self-aware, and loved ones often feel burdened if not only bringing awareness, but getting the person with OCD to start the process of reconciliation for the impact of their thoughts and their actions. Okay, so let me make sure I'm understanding that right. Miracle, you're asking if they have lower awareness of the impact of their obsessional doubts and compulsions, how do we go about beginning to address that and to teach them that? Am I understanding that question right? Yes, especially outside of the therapeutic setting. Yes, great point. So, Rich Gallagher has a whole process on just meeting with family that I think is really important. And I love his process. He just meets with them and have them talk about um, sometimes the OCD sufferer needs accommodations. And for the family, it's distressing. For the OCD sufferer, it's distressing. And everyone who loves and cares about them, it's distressing. It's like I'm on the roller coaster ride with any habits or addiction. You're on the front, but the family's dragged along, right? And it's exhausting. Family's usually the one trying to turn on the lights and shed the light on them. And in this family meeting, we just talk about, for right now, what is the accommodations that they need that feels important. So for a client who's afraid of contamination, they may still need family to take off their shoes before going into the house. But family can also talk about how distressing is this accommodation? Because maybe it's not just shoes, but you want me to change and shower every other hour as you're scared and you're afraid. For family, that would be very distressing. And so there's a process of discussion and negotiation that he has in his book that's just talking about let's put it all out in the open. When are you having obsessional doubts? What are accommodations that you need? How important are those? So if that's important on 0 to 10, it's 7 or higher, then in this moment, let's do what we can to accommodate them as they heal, because they're not going to be stuck in that forever. If it's distressing to the family at a 7 or higher, then we need to negotiate something different because we don't want the family to be tortured either in this moment as we're working on them healing their OCD. And then ultimately, it's most powerful when it's not from outside of them calling out, like you're just being crazy or you're obsessional, because usually it's quite critical. You're in an obsessional doubt, etc. We're teaching them the tools to identify it for themselves. So in time, from lack of awareness, they go into a space of greater awareness. Oh, I realize that felt really real, but I was in an obsessional doubt. And I could see why that was overwhelming for my family. And it was obsessional because I wasn't trusting my sense data. I wasn't trusting myself. I did see the water was dirty, but it came from a broken water heater, not because there was a lot of flesh-eating amoeba in there. That was my imagination. And so ultimately, walking through the modules gives them a lot more self-awareness, and it's going to be a lot more powerful than family continuing to call them out. And then in the meantime, there are spaces to meet with family, to discuss this, to teach them how to best respond. In the past, it was usually like zero accommodations, never accommodate. And with Rich's process, I just find it to be even more compassionate, and it doesn't last forever when you can give into some accommodations as they're working towards healing. Miracle, did that answer your question? Oh, thank you so much. And I'll send out to you all Rich's book again. I don't think it's on the 99-cent sale anymore, but it's just a great OCD resource. Okay. Someone's saying the attachment didn't come through on my email. I sent it from the first part one, and I also sent it 10 minutes before the training. So see if that shows up for you. Any other thoughts or questions about this process? This is truly a really different way to treat OCD than I've ever been trained, like through ERP, rumination focused ERP. There's some pieces of that, but yeah, I-CBT is just a whole different process that addresses the cognitive aspects, the doubts in a more like mindful way. It's more meta, right? You're just observing it outside of it. Phyllis likes the inclusion of the family and helping them address OCD. Oh, yes, absolutely. Family, oh, gosh, when I connect with them, I have so much compassion for family as well, because this is such a painful, torturous process. I just remember meeting with this family member, and they're just crying the whole time, talking about just how much they love their loved ones that suffer from OCD and how tortured they feel, how left hanging they feel sometimes when a person's just lost in their OCD bubble. And so there's so much loneliness and grief. Just making space for that, I find to be just so valuable. And then the OCD sufferer can also hear the impact, right? Not in a way where it's shaming, but even if they feel some guilt or a part of them feels guilt about it, I honor that guilt. Like, guilt is good. Guilt shows that you really care to make a difference. It probably drove you to get help because you actually want to be there for your family. You don't want to get lost cleaning for 3 hours or checking things for 8 hours, right? That's why you're here, to get help. Can you speak on applying this to mental compulsions? Oh, yes, absolutely. So there's physical compulsions where they're cleaning, you can see it, they're hand washing, they're showering, they're checking their doors. And then there's mental compulsions. Mental compulsions are when they're absorbed in that story. What if, whatever, right? What if I could sexually abuse my child? Mental compulsions could be I'm praying 10 times. I review the memories to make sure I didn't touch my child inappropriately in any way. I may ruminate and retrace memories. I just may do things internally. And you could see like they're really checked out too in this moment. It's very dissociative. All compulsions I'm realizing in the OCD bubble are quite dissociative. And so applying this to mental compulsions is really the exact same thing. And Michelle, can I clarify first? Are you asking about the here and now exposure tool or just the whole I-CBT process? Yes.
Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much for even addressing this. I'm speaking to folks that have to think the correct thought in order to proceed
Mhm,
with so getting in and out of bed, having to redo a behavior because they have to have the correct thought.
mhm. Yeah.
And like a positive thought. So if the negative thought comes through, they have to redo.
Mhm. Yeah, so it sounds like there's some just right things, right? Like a just right OCD is like I have to have the right thought or it has to feel positive enough and be just right before I move forward. Am I hearing that mental
Yes,
confusion
that's
right?
correct. Yes.
Yeah. And so in I-CBT, we have to first see, is there an obsessional doubt? Is there a doubt where they're saying like, if I don't do this, something bad will happen? Because sometimes there's not with just right. Sometimes it's just, I'm just trying to get this right feeling so then I could go on. So that would be the first thing I would check. Is there an obsessional doubt? A what if, a maybe that then leads them to be absorbed in a feared consequence?
Got it. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I could apply I-CBT just like we do to it. If there is not an obsessional doubt, though, I have some clients where it's just like, I just need that right feeling. I had one who would just, she had to have the microwave in at a certain number, like for example, 7 or 3, otherwise she has to redo it. And she didn't have an obsessional doubt. She didn't think it would blow up. She didn't think someone would die or something bad would happen. It just would only feel right then. And then I would do more of the here and now exposure. And then what are you ready for? More ERP would be more helpful with them on if you could proceed with life, even if you didn't feel the just right feeling. What would you be ready to do right now? Right. And then if they're not ready, um, this a tool that I'll demonstrate with you on addressing motivation can be really helpful in that process too, because ultimately it's allowing the not right feeling to be as you proceed with life instead of trying to continue to achieve that just right, um, which does come up for a lot of people. Okay, let me see what time it is, 11:30. Okay, let me take one more question and then I will do module 7 and show you the TEAM-CBT tool for addressing resistance and motivation. Okay. Nathan, curious about how to help clients discuss the feared possible self when the possible self has an element of truth. Oh, okay. For example, if I fear I might be the type of person who hurts people, well, that's an inevitable part of being human. We all accidentally and sometimes or on purpose hurt people. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So when we talk about the feared possible self, usually what they're afraid of is way worse than just the everyday human things, right? Where I could just accidentally say something to hurt somebody. We all do that. As human beings, we make mistakes. But for them, their feared possible self is usually they are a person who is constantly this way. Like it's a greater intensity, it's something that's just not acceptable. And when it's OCD, it's usually the opposite of who they are. So for my clients who are afraid that they would say something to hurt somebody, they're usually very conscientious. They want to say the right thing and do the right thing, and they're actually really sensitive to people's feelings. But then they're afraid that they're this other type of person in a much greater intensity, that's not based on reality. So it's not like they're seeing like, oh, I'm a human being, and sometimes, I'm afraid I could hurt people. That's true for everyone. But for them, they actually don't have any here and now evidence that they are a harmful or hurtful person to the intensity that they're afraid of being. But in their feared self, they really think they are that person. So they're doing everything that they can to prevent that from happening. Did that answer your question, Nathan? Yeah, thank you. Okay, one last one and a great one as well. How do you distinguish is an intrusive thought PTSD or OCD? Yes, that's a really good question. Because someone who's been through a trauma, it can look like OCD, right? Let's say someone who's been a victim of rape, she may then check her doors, check the locks, check the windows, and then have a fear, what if someone's gonna hurt me again? And so for this person, it's based on a trauma through something, yes, it's personal experience. And it's something they have recently been through. And I also do a lot of testing at intake. And so I would look at, are there trauma symptoms right now through the PCL, the post-traumatic screening? And to just really see, has there been a trauma history that's showing up right now that may look like OCD? And then when it's an obsessional doubt, usually it's not like it's still just has this space where they're not tied to like a recent thing that they've been through, but they're really doubting what's here right now. So the person that's going through trauma is usually like replaying actual events. They may replay memories, it's flashbacks, it's real things that are very in conscious awareness. A person with OCD, the intrusive thoughts are usually like imagined possibilities. So I'm afraid of the amoeba going into my children's system, mold infecting all of us. The house then gets broken down and broken into because I forgot to lock it. Intrusive memories from someone with trauma is usually what actually happened to them. So it could be a distant trauma or present trauma, but it's like I can't get out of my mind this horrible thing my body actually experienced or my mind actually experienced. Does that distinguish that? I hope that was a bit clearer. And Bronwyn Schroyer, my I-CBT trainer, she's brilliant. She sees PTSD in about like 80% of her OCD clients. And so I think that's a really interesting piece. And she talks about when we walk through OCD and all of the I-CBT process, and OCD is mostly resolved, but not completely resolved, we may really look at, is there any PTSD or trauma that's keeping some of these symptoms going? And usually then when she also treats the PTSD, it resolves everything. So yeah, really great question. All right, so at this time, is there anyone open to helping me bring to life what I do in module 7 about the OCD bubble? And you could use an actual struggle if you struggle with OCD. You can just think of a client, though, who's engaged in some compulsions and obsessions. And I know it's a bit anxiety provoking being in front of the group and everything, so you don't have to use any of your real stuff if that's easier for you. And this is one of my favorite tools just for anything, like any habit that someone's engaging in. It's very validating first to let them know there are good reasons why you're engaging in this. Even if it looks insane and feels insane, there's a good reason why you're staying in the OCD bubble. So let's honor that. Let's see those reasons first, and then I could channel the part of them that wants change. Okay, so think about it and let me know if you are interested in helping to bring that to life. But right now, let me share with you what we do in Module 7. The OCD bubble. Why is it called a bubble? Because being trapped in the bubble feels so real. And we also see it's dissociative, right? It's like I'm in my own world. I'm in this imaginary world, and it's like someone's trapped in the bubble. And so if you think of a client who's ruminating, cleaning, etc., because of this feared thing in their imagination, they really are in their own world, trapped in their own world in that space. And what we see is there's a great fear of leaving. So a lot of times people aren't in the bubble doing their compulsions because it feels really pleasurable or relieving. It's just really terrifying to leave, because choosing to leave may mean I actually am that harmful person. I actually am that careless, oblivious person. So let me stay in just a little bit longer just to make sure that I check that the food is not contaminated, that I check that I didn't hurt my loved one, that I'm not going to drown my child, because who would want that to become true, right? And it's all a possibility in their imagination. But right now, it feels like if I leave the bubble, I'm choosing to become this really horrible person. And that's what OCD says. So it feels like a losing situation for them. And at the same time, what we see is that they can actually leave the bubble because there's zero chance that they'd become their feared possible self. So it isn't a losing situation. It's a situation where they can leave the imagined story and actually get back into reality. And there's actually no chance of them becoming their feared possible self, because that's not who they are. It's an obsessional doubt about who they are that's never been based on here and now evidence. Okay. So in this module, we have them walk through when you're in the bubble. Just now take a step back again and notice, what was the first thought that came to mind that took you beyond your senses? So for my client who's afraid that she's going to drown her child, the first thought is, what if I lose control and I just let go and I drown him? What if I actually push him down? Because, sometimes I could lose control or lose my mind, and just become this heartless, evil person. So that was the first thought, is then they recognize, oh, there was a what if. Before that, I knew I was just playing with my child in the pool or at in the bath. But the first thought that came that took me beyond my senses was usually a what if, a possibility. And how does that thought make your senses seem irrelevant? What sense could you trust to root yourself back in reality, right? So how does this thought make your senses irrelevant? Well, this thought then didn't trust my true self, didn't trust my perceptions. I'm here playing with my child. I actually have really good control of my fingers and my arms. I see and feel my hands are just washing their head. My inner sense data is I'm here to get my child clean. And if I'm playing at the pool, I'm here to get them cognitively stimulated. I care about sensory play and how that helps them to develop. And so this thought is trying to make my senses irrelevant. And then what senses could I trust to root me back in reality? And you're just pausing there without doing any compulsion. So this is a piece of response prevention as well. But it's just pausing, having that bird's eye view, noticing this process. What could I trust to root me back in reality? And so my client said, I can trust that I'm a mother who has always been attentive to my children, and I really care about their emotional and physical well-being. And then I can trust that right now I'm here with safe hands. My hands are here engaging, cleaning, tickling, and I can sense all of that. I can hear them laughing. I can see my child feels really safe with me. And so those are the senses that can help them use their typical reasoning processes that usually is just present in reality. Okay. Then see themselves as they pause for those 60 seconds. You're on this bridge. And on here, if you could trust your senses, your 5 senses, your common sense, your real self, your inner sense data, and go back to reality, and know you have a choice right now. You can go further into the doubt and just do a lot of efforting, put in a lot of effort, way more effort than you ever would in any reasonable doubt. Because the reasonable doubt is like, what if I didn't brush my teeth? I don't check and check and check again. Is the toothbrush really wet? Is my teeth really feeling cleaner? Is my breath really minty? Let me check it again. I just check it once and I move on. Right? So you could go further into the doubt, do a lot of efforting, checking, either cognitively, mentally, or physically. Or you could choose to go back to reality and know that the doubt is irrelevant when you trust your senses. Okay. And this sounds really easy, but I found that In this process, when a client is struggling in the moment, they know they have these choices, and it feels terrifying to leave that bubble. And so I thought pulling in how TEAM-CBT addresses resistance has been really powerful. If you chose to go further into the doubt, that's okay. Just notice it, learn from it. It's not a space to shame, it's not a space to beat themselves up, although there probably will be that part, right? Because we talked about in internal family systems, there's always going to be a critical part that's ashamed of the OCD. And then there's a part that's so scared to leave the bubble. And right now, I want to work with addressing that fear. Why are you so scared to leave? What are the benefits of staying in the bubble? Cheryl, thank you so much for jumping in and volunteering for this role play. And so you imagine we've gone through all the modules from 11 back to 4, 5, 6, and we're in this bubble module. And we're talking about you're now on this bridge. And it may sound like it's easy to see, oh, I look left and right. To the right side, I get more absorbed in the doubt. Let me figure it out one more time. Let me go into my imagination. On the left side of the bridge is reality, going back to reality where you trust your sense data, you're not pulling in irrelevant associations and possibilities. And that may sound easy, but this is usually the core of the work that's been the most challenging for people. And so when I see that people get absorbed in the bubble, there's a lot of good reasons as to why you chose to go in and that you stay in. I'm wondering if that's been the case for you. Is it okay if I just call you Cheryl, even though you're playing your...
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the surface, it sounds straightforward and logical. But when I'm in the moment, I just I almost don't even notice that it's happening, just get sucked right in.
Oh, absolutely. So right now we are wanting to create even more awareness, right? When you're first thinking of realizing, oh, I think I'm stuck in this space of doing compulsions, we're slowing down to see what was the first thought that took you away from trusting your senses in reality. And you're totally not alone, Cheryl, on not even noticing. Sometimes it's just automatic. It's muscle memory that then pulls us right into the OCD bubble. And you don't even realize until you're already absorbed in it and kind of dissociated as well, right? So in this moment, I really want to look at understanding when you're there. Not only did you not notice that you got there, but oftentimes there's a lot of good reasons to go there. And there's a lot of good reasons to stay in the bubble. And I'm hearing from you in the past, like there's often things your fears show that you're really trying to protect something, that you're really scared about something happening. What has been your reasons for staying in the bubble when you're just trying to do one more thing, one more compulsion?
Um, I really care about my patients and I'm worried. I think probably most of their opinion is based on when we meet in person, so they'd probably say I was caring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we're just talking about living out your values in reality, just as you are, right? And so just as you are right now, your patients already see you as caring. And anything else from you, Cheryl, on what this was like for you and what specifically allowed the 40% motivation to leave the bubble to go up to 90% for you?
I think a lot of it was the reminders that when I'm trying to live out my values in the bubble, it's having the reverse effect that I would want it to from reality, and it's just wearing me down, just kind of draining to live like this all the time.
Yeah, so connecting with the exhaustion of how hard you're working in that bubble to try to live out your values. And
And
that
then not do, yeah, it's just like spinning wheels and not catching anywhere. Just
right. Living out your values in the bubble just leads you to do more and more, and then it's never enough, right? Doubt seeds more doubt. It never feels adequate or enough. And then it actually takes you away from living out your values in reality with everyone that you care about. And I'm hearing you still are. It's just not to the level that you could or you would like it to be in reality. But at times it had led to not being present as you'd like to, right? For your family or your loved ones. Yeah. So I hear in that, like, you're driven by your care for them. So, like, let me heal from this process to where I can show up in reality more for them. And what would that be like for you? Let's say that you do that, and then there's less absorption in your OCD bubble and imagination, and you're actually doing more of what we're talking about, real life care and responsibility with family, being more present with your patient, more time with exercise, hobbies, connection. What would that be like for you?
It's hard to even imagine, but I lighthearted and
Love that.
happy,
Mm.
happier, more relaxed, and more pleasant to be around, because I know even when I'm like trying to spend time with my family and my mind is pulling me back to my desk, I'm kind of a pain.
I love these words and what the space would be like for you, is lighthearted, happier, more pleasant to be around. Sounds like more present too, because you can just be there instead of being drawn to, like, let me do one more thing to make sure I don't become this heartless, careless provider. Right? Yeah, thank you so much, Cheryl, for, like, you as my client, but also you as my friend and volunteering to do this to help bring it to life. Any other thoughts or takeaways for you, Cheryl, from being in the client walking through this motivational process? So we're pretty much positively reframing, staying in the bubble, and then voicing the resistance, allowing the client to take on the voice of change for leaving the bubble.
For me, it really was powerful to have the distinction between, like, this is what these values are trying to do, but they're trying to do it within the scope of imagination. Because where I've gotten stuck with this before is it sometimes feels like they're on a level playing field. And like I'm actually living out these values by spending all of this time and like spinning my wheels, because this really genuinely is advancing my goals of being caring and dependable and all of this stuff. But it's not actually a level playing field, because those don't have any grip on outcomes or being a caring person. So walking through it with that, I'm gonna have to watch the replay to see where you use the words of like, okay, so you're playing this, like you're doing this in your imagination, and seeing that that gap, that big distance between, it's like, okay, this is what I'm trying to do, but the reason that I'm burning myself out is because I get no traction and I'm not actually accomplishing my goals. And in fact, I'm getting farther away from them. So,
Oh, yes. I love how you worded that. And I think that's been a big one for my clients as well, because they hear leaving the bubble is I leave my values. I leave my values behind. And we're telling them, actually, you leave the bubble and you take your values with you and you apply them to reality. And then it's like, oh, I get to keep my heart and my care and apply it in a way that makes a difference in the world, which is truly what I want. Then it just creates a different, I feel like it just helps with that piece that was resistant when it was just I-CBT, and it's like, leave it for 60 seconds and then go back to reality and live in reality. I feel like taking your values with you across the bridge has felt really important for
Oh,
people.
super powerful. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that point, and thank you for everything.